The desert sky over Iraq burned orange and black armor in black March 2003. The night Operation Sandstorm Fury died. Radio static crackled through the darkness, punctuated by explosions that lit the horizon like dying stars. 6 FA-18 Super Hornets had flown into that inferno. Only the screaming remained. Phantom Team compromise all units down abort mission. The voice belonged to a young woman, 24 years old. Her hands locked on a control stick as her world came apart at 600 miles per hour. Behind her, 4 burning contrails marked where her sisters had fallen. Ahead, only fire and sand and the certainty of death. She flew anyway. 21 years later, that same woman stepped off a military transport at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, San Diego, California. The California sun beat down on the tarmac, but Captain Sarah Hayes moved through it like she was still somewhere cold and distant. 45 years old now. Steel gray eyes that had seen too much. A face that revealed nothing. She carried one duffel bag, no fanfare, no welcome party, just the weight of memory no one could see. The admin clerk who processed her arrival barely looked up from his screen. Her file sat thin on the desk between them. Sarah knew what it said because she had watched them construct the lie 9 years ago, word by careful word. Captain Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, age 45, service record 9 years administrative support logistics coordination, transferred from Marine Corps Base Quantico. Reason for transfer routine rotation. Combat experience none listed. Flight status, inactive desk assignment only. Every single word a fiction. The clerk stamped her papers without interest. Welcome to Miramar, Captain. Barracks assignment is Building 7, Room 212. Report to Colonel Cunningham at 0800 tomorrow. Sarah nodded once and walked away, her boots marking a steady rhythm against concrete that had been walked by legends. Top Gun had been born here, the best of the best. Now it would be her cage, same as Quantico had been, same as every assignment they had buried her in since she crawled out of that Iraqi desert with sand in her lungs and blood on her hands. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she stood at the window of her bare quarters and watched the flight line. Rows of FA-18s sat silent in the darkness, their noses pointed toward a sky they would tear through at dawn. Sarah's fingers traced the window glass, feeling nothing, remembering everything. Somewhere in the night, she heard jet engines roar to life for a training run. The sound hit her chest like a fist. For just a moment, she was 24 again, hearing Blake's voice in her headset. Sarah, we follow orders. We pull back. And her own voice, young and certain, and about to make the choice that would define every day after, I can't leave them. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and breathed until the memory receded back into the dark, where it lived. Morning came hard and bright. Colonel Thaddeus Cunningham sat behind his desk in the command building, a cup of coffee going cold beside a stack of personnel files. At 68, he should have retired years ago. Would have, if not for the fact that sitting still felt like dying slowly. The Marine Corps had been his life since 1974. Vietnam had ended before he could deploy, but he had made his bones in the Gulf War commanding a tank company through the desert in 1991, when the world thought Saddam Hussein could not be touched. He had proved them wrong then. He had been proving people wrong ever since. Now he flipped through Sarah Hayes' file and felt that old instinct prickling at the back of his neck. The instinct that had kept him alive when younger men died. The one that said something here does not add up. 9 years of logistics work, spreadsheets and supply chains. Then a sudden transfer to a combat air station with an active fighter wing. Why, the file gave no real answer, just bureaucratic language that said everything and nothing. Cunningham had seen classified operators before. He knew what they looked like. At exactly 0800, Sarah knocked twice and entered. She stood at attention, shoulders square, eyes forward. Military bearing so perfect it looked carved from stone. Cunningham studied her for a long moment. Her uniform was immaculate, ribbons correct, but her hands, he noticed, had small scars across the knuckles. Old burns, maybe, and the way she stood, weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. That was not a desk officer's posture. At ease, Captain. Cunningham gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Sarah remained standing. I prefer to stand, sir. That was not a request. She sat, but even seated, she looked coiled. Ready, Cunningham leaned back. Your file says you have been coordinating logistics at Quantico for 9 years. Yes, sir. Supply chains? Inventory management? Exciting stuff. It served its purpose, sir. And what purpose was that? For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear, something harder. To keep me out of the way, sir. Cunningham's eyebrows rose. At least she was honest. He pulled her file closer, flipped it open. It says here you requested transfer to an active air station. After 9 years behind a desk, you want to be around fighters again. He looked up. Why? Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I have my reasons, sir. That is not an answer, Captain. It is the only one I have, sir. They stared at each other across the desk. Outside, a jet screamed down the runway, afterburners shaking the windows. Sarah did not flinch, did not even blink. Cunningham made a decision. He reached for his computer, pulled up the detailed personnel system. Let me see your full service record. He typed in her name. Hit enter. The screen went black for exactly 3 seconds. Then red text appeared stark and final. Cunningham stared at the screen. In 44 years of service, he had never seen a personnel file locked at presidential level. Not for a logistics captain. Not for anyone below flag rank. He looked at Sarah. She sat perfectly still, but something in her eyes had changed. A resignation, maybe, like she had been waiting for this moment. Captain Hayes, Cunningham said slowly, would you like to explain why your service record requires authorization from the President of the United States to access? No, sir, I would not. That was not. With respect, sir, I cannot explain what I am not authorized to discuss. Her voice remained level, but underneath it ran something that sounded like old pain. If you want answers, you will have to ask someone above my pay grade. Cunningham studied her for another long moment, then nodded. Dismiss, Captain. Report to the quartermaster for your station assignment. Sarah stood, saluted with mechanical precision, and left. The moment the door closed, Cunningham picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not called in 5 years. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Cunningham, thought you were dead. Not yet, Patterson. Listen, I need a favor. Major General Harold Patterson, now serving at the Pentagon in some intelligence capacity, Cunningham had never fully understood, sighed down the line. This is not a social call. I have a captain here, Sarah Hayes. Her file is sealed at presidential level. I need to know why. The silence that stretched too long. Patterson? Thaddeus? The general's voice had changed, gone cold and official. Cease your inquiry immediately. That is a direct order. I am not under your command, Harry. I am telling you as someone who values your career and your pension. Do not dig into Captain Hayes. Do not access her records. Do not ask questions. A pause. That comes from the Joint Chiefs. You understand me? Cunningham's grip tightened on the phone. What did she do? Thaddeus, let it go. The line went dead. Cunningham sat in the silence of his office and felt something he had not felt since the Gulf War. The sense that he was standing on ground that could explode beneath him at any moment. He looked at Sarah Hayes's thin file sitting on his desk, all lies and misdirection, and thought about the scars on her hands, about the way she had not flinched when the jet screamed overhead, about how she stood like someone who had been to war and come back alone. He had seen classified operators before. This time he was looking at a legend. The next morning, the entire base learned what Sarah Hayes could do. The firing range sat at the eastern edge of Miramar, a sprawling complex of lanes and targets where Marines came to prove they could kill. Captain Donovan Carter stood there with 3 other pilots cleaning his rifle while bitching about the new transfer. Another diversity hire, Carter said, just loud enough to be heard. 29 years old, top graduate from his flight school class, 4 years of active combat missions over Afghanistan. He flew like he was born to it, and he knew it. 9 years pushing papers, and they send her here, probably checking some box. The other pilots laughed, not because it was funny, but because Carter was the kind of man you laughed with or got left behind. Then Sarah walked onto the range. She wore standard fatigues, her hair pulled back tight. No patches on her uniform except her rank and name. She moved to the weapons rack, selected an M4 carbine without hesitation, checked the chamber with movements so smooth that he looked like muscle memory burned into bone. The range master, a gunnery sergeant with 30 years in the Corps, handed her a magazine. 50 rounds, Captain. Standard qualification, 300-yard static targets. Sarah loaded the weapon, raised it, fired. The first shot hit center mass on target 1. The second hit center mass on target 2. By the 10th shot, every Marine on the range had stopped what they were doing to watch. 50 rounds, 50 targets spread across the range at 300 yards. Sarah fired with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark with barely a pause between. The rifle became an extension of her body. When she finished, she safed the weapon, set it down, and looked at the range master. He was staring at the monitor showing the target analysis. Every single shot had hit within the kill zone, most within 2 inches of dead center. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. Sarah's expression did not change. What is next? The range master, recovering his composure, pointed to the advanced course. Moving targets, 300 yards. Wind compensation required. He did not say it should be impossible. Did not have to. Moving targets at that distance in the variable coastal wind, even the best shooters missed a third of their shots. Sarah loaded a fresh magazine. The targets began to move, mechanical arms swinging them across the range at irregular intervals. Wind gusted in from the ocean, carrying salt and the promise of difficulty. Sarah breathed out slowly, then fired. Target 1, moving right, hit. Target 2, moving left, hit. Target 3, erratic pattern, hit. She worked through the entire course like she was reading a script only she could see, anticipating movement, compensating for wind. Each shot a conversation between her, the weapon, and the physics of death. When she finished, the range master checked the results twice because he did not believe them the first time. 48 hits out of 50 attempts, a new base record. Carter stood frozen, his rifle forgotten in his hands. Around him, Marines muttered to each other, casting sidelong glances at the woman who had just made them all look like amateurs. Sarah returned the M4 to the rack, signed the qualification sheet, and walked away without a word. She did not see Carter's face darken with something that was not quite anger, not quite fear. Something worse, wounded pride. The combat simulation facility occupied a converted hangar on the north side of the base. Inside, Marines trained for close-quarters battle using paintball rounds and electronic sensors that tracked every hit, every miss, every moment of violence made safe for practice. Sarah arrived for her mandatory combat qualification at 1400 hours. The instructor, a compact staff sergeant with scar tissue where his left eyebrow used to be, looked her over with open skepticism. Captain, this is a physical course. Hand-to-hand close-quarters tactics. You can observe if you prefer. I am here to qualify, Sergeant. He shrugged. Your call, ma'am. You will be going against 4 Marines. They will attempt to secure the objective. You will attempt to stop them. Paintball rounds only, but contact is authorized. He paused. It can get rough. Sarah stripped off her blouse, leaving only her tank top and fatigues. The scars on her arms became visible. Burns, lacerations, the kind you got from ejecting from aircraft or crawling through wreckage. The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Begin when ready, Captain. The simulation started. 4 Marines entered the kill house, moving in tactical formation. They were good, trained. They covered angles, communicated with hand signals, advanced like they had done this 1,000 times. Sarah hit the first one before he cleared the doorway. A strike to the elbow that collapsed his guard, followed by a sweep that put him on the ground. She disarmed him in 2 seconds and moved to the next target. The second Marine tried to engage from the right. Sarah used his momentum against him, redirected his rifle, drove her elbow into his solar plexus. He went down gasping. The third and fourth rushed her together, trying to overwhelm with numbers. It did not work. Sarah moved like water through stone. Every block flowed into a strike. Every defense became an attack. She used angles they could not cover, created openings they could not close. Advanced close-quarters combat, the kind taught to Special Operations Forces. The kind that did not appear in standard Marine Corps training. 95 seconds after the drill began, all 4 Marines were on the ground, and Sarah stood in the center of the room, breathing hard but steady. The observation room erupted in shocked silence. Among the watchers stood Sergeant Avery Brennan, 26 years old, fresh off her second deployment to Syria. She had grown up wanting to be a Marine since she was 8, watching her father's old Gulf War videos. Now she watched Sarah Hayes and felt something shift in her understanding of what was possible. "Who the hell is she?" Avery whispered. No one had an answer. That evening, Carter found Sarah in the hangar, standing alone beneath the belly of an FA-18 Super Hornet. The fighter loomed above her, 37,000 pounds of thrust and violence painted in gray camouflage. Sarah's hand rested on the fuselage like she was touching something holy. "You know how to shoot," Carter said from behind her, "and you know how to fight. But can you fly?" Sarah turned slowly. In the harsh hangar lights, her face looked carved from marble. "I qualified on FA-18s, she said quietly. When a decade ago, Carter stepped closer, his ego wounded and looking for somewhere to land the blow. "I am the top pilot on this station, Captain Hayes. I have 400 combat hours over hostile territory. I have seen things that would ground most pilots permanently." He crossed his arms. "I think you are lying about your experience. I think you are here because someone in Washington wants to make a point about women in combat roles." Sarah's expression did not change. "You are entitled to your opinion, Captain." "Then prove me wrong." Carter pointed to the simulator bay. Dogfight scenario. You and me. Let everyone see what you can really do. I do not need to prove anything to you. Maybe not to me, but to yourself. Carter leaned in. 9 years at a desk, Captain. You fly in a simulator, or you admit you do not belong here. Well, for a long moment, Sarah stood silent. Then, tomorrow, 0900, I will be there. Carter smiled. I will go easy on you. Do not. Word spread through the base like wildfire. By morning, every pilot and half the ground crew had found reasons to be near the simulator bay. The observation room filled beyond capacity. Even Colonel Cunningham appeared standing in the back with his arms crossed and his instincts screaming. Sarah entered the simulator first. The cockpit closed around her like coming home. Her hands found the controls without thought. Muscle memory from another lifetime. Carter climbed into the opposing simulator, confidence radiating through the monitors. The simulation initialized. 2 FA-18s 30,000 feet over open ocean. Merge in 60 seconds. Beginning in 3, 2, 1, the controller announced. Fight's on. Carter immediately went aggressive, pulling high and rolling to get position. Classic Otawa maneuver. Exactly what the books taught. He was good. Fast reflexes, smooth on the stick. But Sarah flew like the books had been written about her. She anticipated his climb, rolled beneath. It came up on his 6 before he realized she had moved. Carter cursed, broke hard left, tried to use speed to create separation. Sarah stayed with him, not forcing it, patient, waiting. They merged again. Carter tried a split S reversal, a difficult maneuver that required precise timing. Sarah executed a rolling scissors that should not have been possible at that altitude and speed. She inverted her aircraft, pulled through a supersonic barrel roll, and locked him from above. The simulator bay filled with the tone of a locked missile. Kill, the computer announced. Silence in the observation room. Carter sat in his simulator, hands still on the controls, unable to process what had just happened. Again, he said over the comm. They ran it again. Sarah won, and again. Sarah won, and again. On the 5th engagement, Carter tried something desperate. A high-G turn that pushed the limits of what the aircraft could handle. Sarah matched it, then exceeded it. She pulled into what the observers recognized as a phantom spiral, an inverted corkscrew maneuver at near sonic speed that created a firing solution from an impossible angle. It was dangerous, borderline reckless, the kind of flying that got pilots killed in the real world. It was also perfect. Sarah's simulated missile hit Carter's aircraft dead center. Kill, simulation complete. The observation room remained silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then Avery Brennan started clapping. Others joined. Within moments, the room erupted in applause. Carter climbed out of his simulator, face pale, and walked directly to Sarah. For a moment, the tension hung between them. Then he extended his hand. I was wrong, he said quietly. You are not just good. You are. He stopped searching for words. I have never seen anyone fly like that. Who trained you? Sarah shook his hand once firmly. Classified captain. She turned to leave, but the damage was done. Someone had recorded the simulation feed. By evening, it was on military forums. By midnight, it had spread to YouTube. The video quality was terrible, just a screen recording of a simulator display, but what Sarah had done was unmistakable. The comments started immediately. That's Phantom-era flying. I trained with those pilots in 2003. The Phantom Spiral hasn't been used in 20 years. It was banned after... Holy shit, is that what I think it is? Government said they all died, all of them. Someone survived. At the Pentagon, phones began ringing. Classified channels lit up with urgent traffic. Analysts pulled files that had been buried for 2 decades. Names that were supposed to stay dead started appearing in intelligence reports. In a secure conference room 3 time zones away, General Marcus Webb faced a wall of monitors showing the cascading crisis. Every screen told the same story. The lie was unraveling. How many people know the truth about Operation Sandstorm Fury, he asked. 12, sir. All with clearance above. Not anymore. Webb pointed at the monitors showing the view count climbing past 10 million. In 6 hours, that number will be 6 million. We have 2 options: continue the cover-up and look like we murdered American heroes, or declassify and control the narrative. Sir, declassifying means admitting we lied to Gold Star families for 21 years. Webb's jaw tightened. Then we admit it, and we make it right. Get me the Secretary of Defense. Now. The machine of government, slow to move, began to turn. Orders were drafted, calls were made. And in San Diego, Sarah Hayes had no idea that, while she sat alone in her quarters, Her entire future was being rewritten by men in suits who had spent 2 decades trying to erase her. Morning formation. The entire station assembled on the parade ground under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. 200 Marines in perfect ranks, the kind of order that masked the chaos always lurking beneath the surface of military life. Colonel Cunningham stood at the front, his face carved from the same granite as his reputation. Behind him, the flag snapped in the wind, coming off the ocean. He had not slept. Had spent the night watching that video over and over, seeing something in Sarah Hayes's flying that made his chest tight with a recognition he could not name. The night before, he had made one more phone call, not to the Pentagon, to an old warrant officer he had served with in the Gulf War, a man who now worked deep in the classified archives at Quantico. "Thaddeus, I cannot help you," the warrant had said. "I am not asking for help. I am asking for a name. Phantom Squadron, 2003, Iraq." The silence stretched so long Cunningham thought the line had died. Then, "Jesus Christ, Thad, you do not want to go there. Tell me anyway." Operation Sandstorm Fury, March 2003. 6 pilots, all female Black Ops experimental unit. The mission went sideways. They all died. A pause. Officially. Bow. That file is sealed tighter than anything I have ever seen. Presidential level. The kind of classification that makes people disappear if they ask too many questions. Another pause. But rumor was maybe one made it out. Maybe. What was her call sign? Thad. What was her call sign? Phantom 7. Now Cunningham stood before his Marines and felt the weight of that knowledge pressing against his chest like a stone. He looked across the formation until he found Sarah Hayes standing at attention in the third row, eyes forward, face revealing nothing. He stepped forward, his voice carried across the parade ground with the authority of 4 decades in uniform. "Captain Hayes, front and center." Sarah moved. The formation parted as she walked through it, boots marking perfect time against the asphalt. She stopped 3 paces from Cunningham and saluted. He returned the salute slowly, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "State your name and call sign Captain." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around them, 200 Marines held their breath. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Sir, your name and call sign Captain." Now. The moment stretched. Everything that would come after hinged on what happened next. Sarah knew it. Cunningham knew it. Maybe everyone there knew it in that way that humans sense history being made even as they stand within it. Sarah's shoulders straightened one more degree. Her voice when it came was clear and cold and final as a door slamming shut. "Captain Sarah Elizabeth Hayes, call sign Phantom 7, sir." Cunningham felt the words hit him like shrapnel. His vision tunneled. Blood rushed in his ears. Around him, Marines shifted, confused, not understanding. But Cunningham understood. Phantom 7, the legend that should not exist. His hand trembled as he lowered his salute. His face had gone white. The world seemed to tilt, and for just a moment, he was back in the desert in 91, younger and full of certainty before he learned that war turns everyone into liars. But this was different. This was 2003. This was Iraq. This was the night his son had called him from a satellite phone, voice shaking with relief and trauma, saying, "Dad, someone saved us. The pilots came back. They were not supposed to come back, but they did." Cunningham had asked for names. His son had said the squadron was classified. The pilots were unknown. No one would tell him anything. But he was alive and 12 Marines with him because someone had flown into hell and pulled them out. Now that someone stood in front of him. "The Phantoms," Cunningham whispered the words barely audible. "Operation Sandstorm Fury, March 2003. 6 pilots. You all died. The report said you all died." Sarah's eyes met his. In them he saw something that made his breath catch. Not defiance, not pride. Just an exhaustion so deep it looked like it might never end. "5 died, Colonel," she said quietly. "I walked out of that desert." Around them the formation began to fracture. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Phantom 7, someone pulled out a phone, started searching. Others leaned toward each other, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Sergeant Avery Brennan stood frozen, her mind racing. Phantom Squadron, she knew that name. Everyone who studied military history knew that name, even if the details were classified. The all-female fighter unit that had died in Iraq during the invasion. Heroes, legends, names carved in memory, and one of them was standing right there. Cunningham took a step back. His guards shifted nervously, sensing something had just changed in a way they could not define. The colonel looked at Sarah like he was seeing memory made flesh, which perhaps he was. Dismissed, he said, his voice rough. All of you. Dismissed. The formation broke, but no one moved far. They all wanted to see what would happen next. What you do when a legend stops being a story and becomes a woman in uniform, standing on a parade ground waiting for the world to catch up to the truth. Sarah stood at attention, still waiting, still alone, still carrying memory no one else could see. Cunningham looked at her one more time, then turned and walked toward his office. His step was not quite steady. Behind him, 200 Marines stared at Sarah Hayes. In the silence that followed was the sound of everything changing. The video of the formation went viral within hours. Someone had filmed it on their phone. By sunset, it had 1 million views. By midnight, 10 million. The world wanted to know who was Phantom 7, and why had the government said she was dead. The sun had set over Miramar by the time Colonel Cunningham finally returned to his office. He moved like a man underwater, each step requiring conscious effort. His aide had tried to stop him in the corridor, something about media calls and Pentagon demands, but Cunningham had walked past without hearing. His mind was 21 years away in a different desert, receiving a different phone call. The bottle of bourbon sat in his bottom drawer, where it had lived for 15 years untouched, except for the night his wife had died. He poured 2 fingers into a coffee mug and sat in the darkness, not bothering with the lights. Outside his window, the flight line glowed with work lights as crews prepped aircraft for tomorrow's missions. The routine of war, grinding forward whether anyone understood it or not. His phone buzzed, then again, then continuously. He turned it off. Someone knocked on his door. Cunningham did not respond. The knock came again, harder this time. "Sir, it is Captain Hayes." Cunningham closed his eyes. Of course it was. He should have known she would come. Legends always did. "Enter." Sarah stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She remained at attention near the entrance, not presuming to come closer. In the dim light from the flight line, her face looked carved from shadow. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Cunningham took a long drink. The bourbon burned, but not enough. "You are going to anyway." "I did not mean for this to happen." "Which part?" "The viral video, the questions. The fact that my entire base now knows I have a dead woman serving under my command?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I asked to be left alone. They did not allow that." "They." Cunningham's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "You mean the United States government? The same government that told 12 Marines, including my son, that they were saved by pilots who died heroically. The same government that held a memorial service for 6 women and buried empty caskets with full honors." He set the mug down hard enough that bourbon splashed. "Is that the they you mean, Captain?" "Yes, sir." The honesty of it struck him. No deflection, no excuse, just the truth, simple and terrible. Cunningham stood. He moved to the window, looked out at the jets sitting silent in their revetments. "My son called me from Iraq on March 16, 2003. He was 25 years old. A reconnaissance officer leading a team that should never have been where they were." He paused. "Bad intelligence, bad orders, bad everything. They walked into an ambush and the whole operation went to hell." Sarah said nothing, just listened. "Reese told me he was going to die. He was certain. They were pinned down, ammunition running low, Iraqi forces closing in. He called to say goodbye." Cunningham's voice cracked slightly. "Then something happened. He said the sky lit up. Said 2 jets came in so low he could see the pilots. Said they tore apart the enemy positions with such precision it looked like surgery. Said one of them took fire, went down smoking, but kept flying anyway. Kept protecting them until help arrived." The colonel turned from the window. In the darkness, his eyes gleamed with moisture he would not acknowledge. "When I asked him who saved him, they told him it was classified. When I pushed higher, I was told to drop it or face consequences." The memorial service happened 2 weeks later. 6 names, 6 heroes, 6 lies. He looked directly at Sarah. "And now one of those names is standing in my office, very much alive, and I want to know why." Sarah remained motionless for a long moment. Then she moved deeper into the room, not sitting but standing at something approximating parade rest. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every year she had carried the secret. "Because someone decided the truth was too complicated, sir." "Explain." Sarah took a breath, released it slowly. "Operation Sandstorm Fury, March 15, 2003. 6 FA-18 Super Hornets, 6 pilots. Officially a routine combat air patrol during the initial invasion. Unofficially," she paused, "an experimental unit, all female, black operations. The Pentagon wanted to prove women could fly combat missions at the same level as men. They wanted to prove it quietly without the media circus. Cunningham poured another drink. Did not offer her one. Go on. We were good, sir. Better than good. Major Victoria Blackwood, our leader, had more combat hours than most squadron commanders. Captain Blake Whitmore had reflexes that made flight instructors weep. The others were just as skilled. We trained for 2 years in complete secrecy. Different bases, different identities, always moving. Sarah's eyes grew distant. We were phantoms. We were supposed to be invisible. What was the mission? Chemical weapons depot outside Fallujah. Intelligence said it was lightly defended, minimal anti-air capability. A precision strike, in and out, no one would even know we were there. Her voice went flat. The intelligence was wrong. Outside, a jet engine roared to life for a maintenance check. The sound filled the silence between them. It was a trap, Sarah continued. Someone talked or someone guessed, or we were just unlucky. The moment we approached the target zone, the whole desert lit up. SAM missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, everything they had. We scattered, tried to evade, but there were too many. Major Blackwood took a missile to her wing. She ejected, but she came down in hostile territory. We heard her on the radio for 3 minutes. Then nothing. Cunningham's hand tightened on his mug. Captain Jennifer Stark went down trying to suppress the SAM sites. Lieutenant Amanda Price and Lieutenant Rachel Voss collided trying to evade fire. 4 aircraft gone in less than 10 minutes. Sarah's voice remained steady, but something in her eyes had gone very far away. That left Blake Whitmore and me. We should have aborted. Command was screaming at us to pull back, but then we intercepted the ground frequency. My son's unit. Yes, sir, they were trapped in a compound 3 clicks from our target. Heavy contact, no way out. Estimated 40 minutes until they were overrun. Sarah met his eyes. We could hear them dying, Colonel. Young voices, scared, trying to be brave. One of them was praying, another was calling for his mother. The image hit Cunningham in the chest. He sat down heavily. Blake wanted to follow orders. He was always by the book, always followed procedure. He said we were 2 jets against an army, that we would die for nothing. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But I could not leave them. I told him I was going back. Told him he did not have to follow. But he did. He did. For the first time, emotion cracked through Sarah's control. Blake had a son, Garrett, 3 years old. Blake showed me pictures every day, talked about teaching him to throw a baseball, about watching him grow up. He had every reason to live. She paused. He followed me anyway. Cunningham waited. The story was coming now, and nothing would stop it. We went back, found your son's unit pinned in a compound with walls closing in. Blake and I made our approach from different vectors, drew fire in opposite directions. We hit every enemy position we could identify, turned that battlefield into a graveyard. Sarah's hands hanging at her sides began to shake slightly. Your son and his Marines started moving toward the extraction point. We provided cover, burned through ammunition like we had unlimited supplies. We were winning. For just a moment, we were actually winning. What happened? Blake's aircraft took a catastrophic hit. Some kind of shoulder-fired missile caught him in the engine. His whole tail section started coming apart. Sarah's voice fractured. He could have ejected, should have ejected, but the ejection system had been damaged in the hit. He tried, nothing happened. He was flying a dying aircraft, and he knew it. Outside the window, the flight line blurred in Cunningham's vision. He called me on our private frequency. Said, Sarah, I am not making it home, but you are. Get them out. I told him to stay with the aircraft, that I would cover him to an emergency landing zone. He laughed, actually laughed. A tear tracked down Sarah's face, the first emotion she had shown. He said, tell Garrett his daddy was brave. Then he turned his burning jet directly into the largest concentration of enemy forces and punched his throttle. Cunningham's eyes closed. The explosion was visible for miles. It created a gap in their lines wide enough for your son's unit to reach the extraction point. I stayed overhead covering them until the rescue birds arrived. 12 Marines loaded onto helicopters and lifted out of that hell. Sarah's voice went hollow. Blake died making sure they lived. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air in the office felt thick with the weight of old grief, old debts that could never be repaid. Your aircraft, Cunningham finally said. You made it out. Barely. Took damage from ground fire covering the extraction. My hydraulics were failing, fuel tanks punctured, warning lights across the board. I tried to make it to friendly territory, but the aircraft gave up 60 miles into the desert. Managed a controlled crash landing in the middle of nowhere. And then, and then I survived. Sarah's voice went flat again, the emotion locked back down. 4 days in the desert. No water after the first day. Iraqi patrols searching for downed pilots. I walked at night, hid during the day, prayed I was going in the right direction. On the fourth day, a special forces team found me half dead and delirious. She paused. They were surprised I was a woman. More surprised I was one of the phantoms. I asked about my team. They told me everyone was KIA, told me I was the only one who made it. What did the government do? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Flew me to Germany for medical treatment. Kept me isolated. After 2 weeks, a colonel I had never met sat down and explained my options. Option 1, accept that Operation Sandstorm Fury never happened, that I was never a phantom, that my team died in a classified training accident. Sign the non-disclosure agreement, take the pension, disappear. Option 2, face court-martial for disobeying direct orders to abort the mission, potentially face charges related to the deaths of my team, spend the rest of my life fighting the United States government in classified proceedings I could never win. They threatened you. They eliminated a problem, sir. Female combat pilots in 2003 were politically complicated. An experimental all-female squadron dying on a mission that went wrong was a disaster waiting to explode in the media. Easier to classify everything, hold a quiet memorial service, pay the families, and move on. Sarah's voice went hard. So that is what they did. Buried 6 women, 5 in caskets, 1 in a desk at Quantico. Cunningham stood and walked to her. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not as a captain, not as a problem, but as a woman who had carried this weight for 21 years. My son, he said quietly. You saved my son's life. Blake saved your son's life. I just made sure Blake's sacrifice meant something. That is not how Reese tells it. Cunningham's voice thickened. He said one of the jets stayed until the very end. Said even after the other pilot was clearly hit, even after any sane person would have run, that pilot kept circling, kept protecting them. He said he could see the aircraft smoking pieces falling off, and it still would not leave. The colonel's eyes met Sarah's. That was you. Sarah said nothing. You could have extracted after Blake went down. You could have saved yourself. But you stayed until 12 Marines were safe. Cunningham's voice broke. My son is alive today because of you. He became a Marine. Met a woman, got married, had 2 children. He has a whole life, Captain Hayes. He has a whole life because you refused to leave him. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Cunningham's voice turned fierce. You disobeyed direct orders. You flew a damaged aircraft into a combat zone when every regulation said to abort. You stayed when you should have run. That is not a job, Captain. That is something else entirely. Sarah's control finally cracked. Her shoulders shook once, twice. Then she straightened, forcing the emotion back down through sheer will. Permission to ask a question, sir. Granted. Your son, does he know about the phantoms, about what really happened? Cunningham shook his head slowly. The government told him it was a standard combat air patrol that happened to be in the area. Told him the pilots who saved him were classified for operational security. He tried to find out for years, even used his rank when he made general. They shut him down every time. He paused. He still does not know. Maybe that is better. Maybe. Or maybe he deserves to know that his life cost 5 women theirs. That Blake Whitmore had a 3-year-old son who grew up without a father. That Major Victoria Blackwood was 2 months from retirement. That the other 3 pilots were barely old enough to drink legally. Cunningham's voice went cold. Maybe he deserves to carry that weight instead of you carrying it alone. Before Sarah could respond, Cunningham's phone, which he had turned off, suddenly lit up with an emergency override call. He stared at it. Only 3 people had that access code. He answered. Cunningham. The voice on the other end was crisp, official, and utterly inflexible. Colonel, this is General Marcus Webb, Joint Chiefs of Staff. You have exactly 1 hour to secure Captain Sarah Hayes in isolation and prevent any further contact with your personnel or the media. This is a direct order from the highest levels. Cunningham looked at Sarah. She stood perfectly still, but her eyes said she had expected this. And if I refuse, General, the pause was icy. Then you will be relieved of command face investigation for mishandling classified information and lose your pension. Captain Hayes will be transferred to a black site pending review. This is not a negotiation, Colonel. This is damage control. The line went dead. Cunningham set the phone down gently. His hand was steady. His mind was clear. For the first time in years, he knew exactly what he was going to do. Captain Hayes, you are dismissed. Return to your quarters. Speak to no one. That is an order. Sarah snapped to attention. Yes, sir. She turned to leave. Captain. She stopped. That order is bullshit, and we both know it. Cunningham's voice was quiet but absolute. I do not know what happens next, but I know I did not spend 44 years in this uniform to let them bury you again. So get some rest, because tomorrow we are going to need it. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Then she nodded once and left. Alone in his office, Cunningham pulled out his phone and made a call he had been avoiding for 21 years. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, older now, but still carrying the certainty of someone who had stared at death and walked away. Dad, it is almost midnight. What is wrong? Reese, Cunningham said, I need to tell you something about the day you almost died in Iraq, and you need to sit down. The flight line outside glowed in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a jet engine screamed to life. The sound of war preparing for the next mission, the next battle, the endless cycle that never stopped. But tonight, in a colonel's office on a base that had seen legends born and die, the truth was finally being told. And tomorrow the world would have to deal with what came next. Across the base in her quarters, Sarah sat on her bed and pulled a small box from her duffel bag. Inside 6 photographs. The Phantom Squadron taken the day before they deployed to Iraq. 6 women in flight suits, arms around each other, smiling at a future they would never see. Sarah touched Blake's face in the photo. 26 years old, brown hair, easy smile. In the picture, he was showing the camera a photo of his son Garrett, a 3-year-old boy with his father's eyes. He is 24 now, Sarah whispered to the photograph. Your boy, he became a Marine. Flies helicopters just like you. Her voice cracked. I have watched from a distance, Blake. Kept my promise to keep him safe even if he never knew. She set the photograph down and tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Blake's jet exploding, saw the fire reaching for her, felt the controls go dead in her hands. 21 years of survival, and she still did not know if she had made the right choice. If following orders and living would have been braver than disobeying and dying. If Blake's son would have been better off never knowing the truth about how his father died. The weight of those questions pressed against her chest like a physical thing. For the first time in years, she whispered into the darkness, I do not know if I can do this again. No answer came, just the silence of a room that had seen too many soldiers wrestle with the same doubt. Then her phone buzzed. Emergency alert. And the choice was made for her once more. At 0300 hours, every phone on Miramar started ringing at once. The emergency klaxons shattered the night. Marines poured from barracks sprinting toward their stations. The operations center lit up like daylight. A training exercise had gone catastrophic. A CH-53 Super Stallion helicopter conducting night operations in the Chocolate Mountains had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. The aircraft had crashed in a narrow canyon. 9 Marines aboard. Wildfire spreading from the wreckage. A massive sandstorm system moving in from the east expected to hit the area in less than 2 hours. Standard rescue protocols were impossible. The terrain was too tight for normal approach vectors. The fire made ground access deadly, and the sandstorm would make any rescue attempt after it arrived a death sentence. In the operations center, the base commander looked at his staff with the expression of a man being asked to choose which of his children to save. We need someone who can fly low-altitude approach in limited visibility through a canyon that is barely wider than a helicopter's rotor span, in the dark, with a fire creating unpredictable thermals. Before a sandstorm turns the whole area into a no-fly zone, he looked around the room. Anyone? The silence that followed was the sound of impossible odds. Then a voice spoke from the back of the room. Colonel Cunningham stepped forward, his face set in lines of absolute certainty. I know someone who can do it. Everyone turned to look at him. She has flown in worse, in actual combat, and survived when everyone else died. Cunningham's voice cut through the doubt. Get me Captain Hayes, now. 5 minutes later, Sarah stood in the operations center in her flight suit, looking at the tactical display. The crash site glowed red on the screen. The approaching sandstorm showed as a massive yellow mass. The window for rescue was closing by the minute. Captain Hayes, the base commander said, this is a volunteer mission. The risks are, I will do it, Sarah said flatly. You have not even heard, I will do it. The commander looked at Cunningham, who nodded once. All right, we will have a co-pilot assigned. No, Cunningham stepped forward. I am going with her. The room erupted in protest. Cunningham was 68 years old. He had not flown a combat mission in decades. He had no business. I flew Desert Nav in the Gulf War, Cunningham said, his voice cutting through the objections. I know that terrain. I know how to read sandstorms. And Captain Hayes needs someone who understands what she is walking into. He looked at Sarah. I owe her. I owe Blake Whitmore. And I owe those 9 Marines. I am going. Before anyone could argue further, a junior officer burst into the operations center, tablet in hand, face pale. Sir, we have the casualty list from the helicopter. The base commander took the tablet, scanned the names. His expression went very still. What is it? Cunningham asked. The commander handed him the tablet without a word. Cunningham read the first name on the list and felt the world tilt. Lieutenant Garrett Whitmore, age 24, Marine helicopter pilot. Critical condition. The room went silent. Cunningham looked at Sarah. Her face had gone absolutely white. Her hands, which had been steady through everything, began to shake. Blake's son, she whispered. Cunningham nodded slowly. Blake's son. Sarah stood frozen. 21 years of distance collapsed in an instant. The boy in the photograph, 3 years old, smiling at a camera. Now 24, now lying in a burning wreck in a desert canyon, waiting to die the same way his father had. History repeating with terrible precision. Sergeant Avery Brennan, who had been standing near the back of the operations center, stepped forward. Captain Hayes requests permission to join the rescue crew. Sarah turned to look at her. Why? Because you saved everyone at that drill yesterday. Because you fly like nothing I have ever seen. Because those are Marines dying out there. Avery's voice was steady. And because I think you are going to need all the help you can get. Sarah looked at the tactical display, at the red dot marking 9 souls in the desert, at the yellow mass of the sandstorm approaching like judgment. She thought about Blake 21 years ago making the choice to follow her into hell. She thought about the weight of promises made to dying friends. She thought about a 3-year-old boy who had grown up without knowing his father died a hero. Gear up, Sarah said quietly. We launch in 10 minutes. The operations center exploded into motion, but Sarah stood still for one more moment, looking at nothing, seeing everything. Blake's voice in her memory, tell Garrett his daddy was brave. I will do better than tell him, Sarah whispered. I will show him. Then she turned and walked toward the flight line, toward a helicopter, waiting in the darkness, toward a rescue that would either save Blake's son or kill them all trying. Behind her, Colonel Cunningham followed, his old bones protesting, but his spirit absolutely certain. And behind them both, Sergeant Avery Brennan shouldered her gear and stepped into the story that would define the rest of her life. The night swallowed them. The rotors began to spin. And somewhere in a burning canyon in the desert, 9 Marines waited for legends to save them one more time. The MH-60 Seahawk sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting to hunt. Its rotors hung still in the pre-dawn darkness, but the aircraft thrummed with potential energy, with the promise of violence and salvation in equal measure. Ground crews swarmed around it, loading medical supplies, checking systems, moving with the practiced urgency of people who knew lives hung in the balance. Sarah Hayes walked across the tarmac with her helmet under one arm and 21 years of memory walking beside her. The flight suit felt both familiar and foreign, like returning to a home that had been rebuilt in your absence. Behind her, Colonel Cunningham moved with the careful determination of a man who had made peace with his mortality long ago. And behind him, Sergeant Avery Brennan practically vibrated with nervous energy, the kind that comes before your first real test. The crew chief met them at the aircraft. Chief Warrant Officer Derek Stone, 48 years old, 30 years in the Corps, a man who had seen enough crashes to know when a mission was suicide dressed up as heroism. Captain Hayes, he handed her the pre-flight checklist. Weather update just came in. Sandstorm has accelerated. We have maybe 90 minutes before that whole area becomes unflyable. Winds are already gusting to 40 knots in the canyon. Understood. Ma'am, I have to say this. The approach vector is through a canyon 70 feet wide at the narrowest point. This bird has a rotor span of 53 feet. That gives you 8.5 feet of clearance on each side. In 40-knot crosswinds. In the dark. With thermals from a fire making the air unpredictable. He paused. I have been flying for 30 years. I would not take this mission. Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen worse. Chief, I once flew into conditions where 6 directions had missiles locked on me. This is just wind and rocks. Stone held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Good hunting. They boarded. Sarah took the pilot seat, her hands finding the controls with muscle memory that transcended time. Cunningham settled into the co-pilot position. Avery strapped into the crew bay with the rescue equipment, her young face set in lines of determination. Pre-flight check, Sarah said, her voice dropping into the clipped professionalism of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. They ran through the checklist, every system green, every instrument reading nominal. The helicopter was ready. The question was whether the people inside it were ready for what came next. Miramar Tower, this is Rescue 36 requesting clearance for emergency dust-off to Chocolate Mountain's crash site. Rescue 36, you are cleared for immediate departure. Winds 270 at 25 gusting to 40. Visibility decreasing. Godspeed. Sarah's hands moved across the controls. The rotors spun up, building from a whisper to a scream. The Seahawk lifted off the tarmac, nose dipping slightly, as Sarah transitioned to forward flight. Within seconds, they were racing east into darkness, toward mountains that would either save 9 Marines or become a tomb for 12. Cunningham watched Sarah fly. Her movements were economical, precise, no wasted motion. She read the aircraft like it was an extension of her nervous system. He had flown with good pilots before. This was something else entirely. "You really did this before," he said over the intercom. "In Iraq. Different aircraft, same principle." Sarah's eyes never left the horizon. "Fly into hell. Bring people home. Try not to die. How did that work out?" "I am here. Blake is not. You tell me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine. Outside the windows, the desert slid past beneath them, dark and vast and utterly indifferent to human struggle. The flight stretched on. 40 minutes of darkness and doubt. Sarah's hands stayed steady on the controls, but her mind drifted to places she usually kept locked away. Blake's face. Victoria's laugh. The way Jennifer always hummed before a mission. All of them gone. All of them counting on her to make their sacrifice mean something. Then the glow appeared on the horizon. Fire painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Sarah of other fires, other skies, other nights when everything went wrong. "Crash site visual," Cunningham said, his voice tight. Sarah keyed her radio. "Rescue 36 to crash site, do you copy the static?" Then a voice young and strained with pain. "Rescue 36, this is Lieutenant Whitmore. We copy. 9 souls on board, 3 critical, 4 serious, 2 ambulatory. Fire spreading from fuel leak. We need immediate extraction." Sarah's hands tightened on the controls. That voice, it carried echoes of Blake, the same cadence, the same way of clipping consonants under stress. Genetics written in sound waves traveling across time to punch her in the chest. "Lieutenant Whitmore, this is Rescue 36. We are 2 minutes out. Hang on. Copy that. Ma'am, you should know the LZ is compromised. Canyon is narrow fire, has created severe downdrafts, and we are getting significant wind shear. Recommend you wait for conditions to improve." "Negative, Lieutenant. We extract now or we do not extract at all. Sandstorm inbound." A pause. Then understood. "We will pop smoke when you are on approach." Sarah guided the Seahawk into the canyon mouth. The walls rose on either side, dark stone that seemed to close in like a trap. Her instruments showed the width decreasing. 75 feet, 70, 65. The fire below created thermals that grabbed at the aircraft, trying to flip it to smash it against the rocks. Sarah fought the controls, making constant micro-adjustments, reading the air through the vibrations in her seat, through the subtle changes in rotor pitch, through instincts built from 10,000 hours of flight time. 60 feet, Cunningham called out, his voice steady despite what the instruments were telling them. "We are at minimum clearance." "I see it." Wind slammed into them from the left. The Seahawk lurched sideways. Sarah compensated instantly, applied right rudder, increased collective, brought them back to center. The rotor tips passed within 3 feet of the canyon wall. Avery, strapped in the back, watched the stone slide past close enough to touch and thought about every choice that had led her to this moment. Her father's Gulf War stories. Her decision to join the Marines. The day she had watched Sarah Hayes dismantle 4 Marines in hand-to-hand combat and thought, "I want to be like that." Now she was about to find out what "like that" actually cost. "Smoke," Cunningham said. Below them, purple smoke billowed from the crash site. The CH-53 lay on its side, rotors, shattered fuselage cracked open like an egg. Flames licked at the fuel pooling around it. 9 figures clustered away from the wreck, 3 lying down, others supporting them. Sarah brought the Seahawk into a hover 30 feet above the site. The downdraft from her rotors whipped the smoke and flames into a frenzy. The fire seemed to reach for them, hungry and indiscriminate. "Avery," Sarah called over the intercom. "Deploy the hoist." "Deploying hoist." Avery opened the side door. Wind and heat blasted into the cabin. She secured her safety line and leaned out, guiding the rescue basket down through the chaos below. On the ground, Lieutenant Garrett Whitmore looked up at the helicopter hovering above them with impossible precision in conditions that should have made flight suicidal. His left arm was broken, his head bleeding from a gash across his temple, but he could still function, still give orders, still do what Marines do when everything has gone to hell. "Load the critical casualties first," he shouted to his men over the rotor wash. "Patterson, Davis, Williams, get them in the basket." The first Marine, barely conscious and covered in burns, was loaded into the basket. Avery hauled him up with the electric winch muscles, straining sweat mixing with the smoke and heat. She got him inside, unhooked him, sent the basket back down. "One up," she reported. 8 to go. Sarah held the hover. Every second was a battle against physics. The wind tried to push them into the canyon wall. The fire created turbulence that wanted to flip them upside down. Her arms ached from the constant corrections. Sweat ran down her face inside the helmet. And in her mind, unbidden came the memory of another rescue, another fire, another moment when staying meant dying, but leaving meant abandoning people who had trusted her. Blake's voice crackling with static and certainty. "Sarah, I am not making it home, but you are. Get them out." She had stayed then. She would stay now. The second critical casualty came up. Then the third. 6 Marines left on the ground. Then the wind shifted. A massive gust slammed into the Seahawk from the right side, 45 knots of raw force that overwhelmed Sarah's corrections. The aircraft lurched sideways. The right side rotor passed within 18 inches of the canyon wall. Sparks flew where the rotor tips actually kissed stone. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. The proximity warning blared. Cunningham's hand instinctively reached for controls. He could not override old instincts from his tank commander. Days when you could at least shoot back at what was trying to kill you. Sarah did not panic, could not afford panic. She shoved the cyclic, left applied full left rudder, increased power. The Seahawk responded sluggishly, fighting inertia and wind and gravity. For 3 seconds that lasted 3 lifetimes, they hung on the edge of catastrophe. Then Sarah found the angle, found the balance point, brought them back to stable hover. The rotor tips cleared the wall by 2 feet. The alarm stopped screaming. In the back, Avery had been thrown against her safety line hard enough to leave bruises. She gasped for breath, then immediately reached for the hoist controls. "Still operational. Continuing extraction." "Negative," Cunningham said, his voice tight. "We need to abort. The conditions are deteriorating too fast." Sarah's hands never left the controls. 6 Marines still down there, Colonel. And 12 dead if this bird hits the wall. Then I will not hit the wall. Below them, Garrett Whitmore watched the helicopter stabilize and felt something strange twist in his chest. He had seen good flying before, had flown with the best pilots in the Corps. This was different. This was someone flying like the aircraft was part of their body, like the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. This was someone who had done this before in worse conditions and survived. The 4th Marine came up, then the 5th. 4 left, including Garrett. The fire reached the main fuel tank. The explosion was not catastrophic, but it was violent enough. A fireball erupted from the wreckage, superheated air rising in a column that hit the Seahawk like a fist. The aircraft pitched forward violently. Sarah fought the controls, overcorrected, then corrected again. They dropped 15 feet before she arrested the descent. "Structure integrity compromised." Cunningham read off the instruments. "We have damage to the tail rotor housing. Hydraulics are fluctuating." "How bad?" "Bad enough that we should leave, now." Sarah looked at the screen showing the camera feed from below. 4 Marines still waiting. One of them was Garrett Whitmore, Blake's son, looking up at them with his father's eyes. She thought about Blake pointing his burning fighter at the enemy so others could live. She thought about the photograph of a 3-year-old boy who had grown up without his father. She thought about promises made and the weight of debts that could never be fully repaid. But she also thought about the other voice, the one that whispered in the dark, the one that said maybe she had been lucky, not good. Maybe she had survived not because she was brave, but because she had been selfish, choosing to live when better people had died. For just a moment, doubt crept in, cold and familiar as an old wound. "We stay," Sarah said, her voice flat and final as a judge passing sentence, but her hands trembled slightly on the controls. Cunningham looked at her profile backlit by the instrument lights and saw something that took his breath away. Not recklessness, not bravery. Something simpler and more terrible, absolute certainty that some things mattered more than survival, even when survival was all you had left. He had seen that look before, on young Marines charging machine gun nests in the Gulf War, on medics running into gunfire to reach wounded soldiers, on his own son's face when Reese had volunteered for a deployment everyone said was suicide. It was the look of someone who had already made peace with death and found it less frightening than living with regret. "All right," Cunningham said quietly. "We stay." The 6th Marine came up, then the 7th. Garrett Whitmore directed the 8th Marine into the basket, a young lance corporal who could barely walk, legs shattered in the crash. Avery hauled him up, muscles screaming in protest. "8 up, 1 to go." On the ground, Garrett secured himself in the basket and gave a thumbs up. Avery started the winch. That was when the sandstorm hit. It came not as a gradual increase, but as a wall, a solid mass of wind-driven sand that turned day into night in an instant. Visibility dropped to 0. The instruments went haywire as sand infiltrated the sensors. The Seahawk lurched like it had been kicked by God. Sarah flew blind. The artificial horizon tumbled uselessly. The altimeter gave readings that contradicted reality. Outside the windscreen, everything was brown and howling and utterly without reference points. She closed her eyes, ignored the instruments, felt the aircraft through her hands, through the seat, through the subtle pressures and vibrations that told her what the sensors could not. This was flying stripped down to its essence, human and machine fighting the sky, refusing to fall. The doubt vanished. In its place, pure instinct, pure will, the thing that had kept her alive when everyone else died. Cunningham watched her and understood. This was what the government had tried to bury. This level of skill, this instinct that bordered on prescience. This was why they had made Sarah Hayes disappear, because acknowledging her existence meant acknowledging that everything they believed about who could fly and who could fight might be wrong. "Avery," Sarah called over the intercom. "Status. Target is 10 feet below the cabin. Bringing him up now." The winch whined. Garrett Whitmore rose through the sandstorm, spinning slowly on the line, watching the helicopter above him hold position through conditions that should have made flight impossible. He could not see the pilot, could not see anything except the vague outline of the aircraft through the sand. But he knew with the certainty that comes before revelation that whoever was flying had flown through worse and survived. Avery pulled him into the cabin. The moment he cleared the door, she shouted, "All souls aboard! Get us out of here!" Sarah did not need to be told twice. She pushed the cyclic forward, increased collective, and powered out of the hover. The Seahawk surged forward through the sandstorm instruments, still useless visibility, still 0. She flew by instinct and memory, following the canyon back the way they had come. The damaged hydraulics made the controls sluggish. The tail rotor housing, cracked from the earlier impact, began to shudder ominously. Warning lights painted the cockpit in shades of red and amber. "We are not going to make it back to Miramar," Cunningham said, reading the damage reports. "Hydraulics are failing. Tail rotor is coming apart. We need an emergency landing zone." "There," Sarah pointed at the navigation display at a flat area 15 miles ahead. "Old airstrip, decommissioned but still flat. Can we make it?" "Which eyes you are about to find out." The Seahawk limped through the sandstorm like a wounded bird refusing to acknowledge its mortality. Every mile was a negotiation with physics. Every minute was borrowed time. In the belly, Garrett Whitmore held pressure on a wounded Marine's leg while Avery worked on another's burns. The cabin smelled of blood and smoke, and the particular stench of fear mixed with relief. 8 Marines who should be dead, held together by tape and prayer, and a pilot who flew like gravity, was optional. Garrett looked toward the cockpit, could see only the back of the pilot's helmet, the steady movements of hands on controls. His father had died in a fighter jet over Iraq, protecting Marines he had never met, had died so others could live. Now someone was doing the same thing. For him, for his team, the mathematics of sacrifice adding up across generations. The airstrip appeared through the thinning edge of the sandstorm. Cracked concrete weeds growing through the cracks abandoned decades ago, but still flat enough for an emergency landing. Sarah lined up on final approach. The hydraulics chose that moment to fail completely. The controls went from sluggish to dead, the cyclic and collective suddenly just pieces of metal connected to nothing. "Hydraulics gone," Cunningham said, his voice tight but controlled. "We are in manual control." Manual control in a helicopter meant fighting against mechanical advantage, every input requiring 10 times the force. Sarah's arms burned, her shoulders screamed. But she pulled, pushed, forced the aircraft to obey through sheer physical strength and refusal to accept failure. The Seahawk dropped toward the runway, too fast, too steep. The landing was going to hurt. "Brace," Sarah shouted. They hit hard. The landing gear collapsed on the right side. The aircraft slewed sideways, metal screaming against concrete. Sparks flew. The windscreen cracked. They slid 200 feet before physics and friction finally agreed to stop killing them. Silence. Then from the back, everyone alive. Affirmative, Avery called. All souls accounted for. Sarah sat in the pilot seat, hands still locked on the controls, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. She had flown into a burning canyon in a sandstorm, extracted 9 Marines and landed a failing helicopter on a strip of concrete in the middle of nowhere. She had done what Blake could not do 21 years ago. She had brought them all home. Cunningham looked at her with something that might have been awe. Captain Hayes, that was the finest flying I have ever witnessed. Sarah said nothing, just sat there breathing, waiting for her heart to remember it was allowed to slow down. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Garrett Whitmore, arm in a makeshift sling, blood dried on his face, limped forward to the cockpit. He looked at the pilot who had just saved his life and 8 others. "Ma'am," he said, "I need to know who you are." Sarah slowly removed her helmet, turned to look at him. Steel gray eyes met brown ones that carried echoes of a man she had watched die. "Captain Sarah Hayes," she said quietly. "Call sign Phantom 7. Garrett's face went white. "Phantom 7, the squadron that died in Iraq in 2003. 5 of us died. I walked out." Sarah paused and for the first time in 21 years prepared to say the words she had never been able to say. "One of the others was Captain Blake Whitmore. He was my best friend, my wingman. He died protecting 12 Marines so I could get them to safety." The words hung in the air like smoke. Garrett's legs nearly gave out. Cunningham caught him, guided him to sit. The young lieutenant stared at Sarah with eyes that had just had their entire history rewritten. "My father," he whispered, "Captain Blake Whitmore. You flew with him. I followed him into hell, and he gave his life so I could lead those Marines home." Sarah's voice cracked. "Blake's last words were about you, about making sure you knew he was brave. I have carried that message for 21 years, not knowing how to deliver it, not knowing how to face you and tell you that your father died because of choices I made." Tears streamed down Garrett's face. "My mother kept one of his letters. He wrote it the night before he deployed. Said if anything happened, I should know he flew with the bravest person he had ever met. Said that person saved him before, and if she was flying that mission, he knew it was for something important." His voice broke. "That was you." Sarah closed her eyes. "I am not brave, Lieutenant. I am just someone who could not leave people behind. Neither was my father, and that is what made him a hero." Garrett reached out, took her hand. "Thank you for staying with him, for bringing him home, for being the reason I got to exist at all." In that moment, in a wrecked helicopter on an abandoned airstrip in the middle of a desert sandstorm, a debt 21 years old was finally paid. 2 hours later, rescue helicopters from Miramar arrived. The sandstorm had passed. Medics loaded the wounded, including Garrett, for transport to the base hospital. Sarah, Cunningham, and Avery were checked over, declared fit for transport. As they lifted off in the rescue bird, Sarah looked down at the damaged Seahawk sitting on the cracked concrete. One more aircraft she had landed broken. One more mission she had survived when she should not have. The pattern of her life written in twisted metal and close calls. At Miramar, the entire base waited. 200 Marines stood in formation on the tarmac as the helicopters landed. When Sarah stepped out, they erupted in applause. Not polite acknowledgement. Thunder, recognition. The kind of sound that comes when people witness something that redefines their understanding of what is possible. Sergeant Avery Brennan stood beside her, tears streaming down her face, understanding now what it meant to fly with a legend. Colonel Cunningham stood on her other side, his arm in a sling from being thrown against the console during the landing, and felt pride so fierce it was almost painful. Then the crowd parted. Major General Reese Cunningham walked through, flanked by 2 Pentagon officials, and a woman in civilian clothes carrying a briefcase marked with classification stamps. Reese was 46 now, gray touching his temples, the weight of command visible in the set of his shoulders. He walked straight to Sarah. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The Marine she had saved and the woman who had disappeared rather than let him know. Then Reese Cunningham snapped to attention and saluted. "Captain Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the silence. "My father told me everything. March 16th, 2003. You and Captain Whitmore saved my life and the lives of 11 other Marines. You have carried that weight as silence for 21 years. His voice broke slightly. "I wish I had known. I wish I could have said thank you sooner." Sarah returned the salute. "You do not need to thank me, sir. I was just doing what anyone would have done." "No," Reese's voice was firm. "What you did, what Blake Whitmore did, that was not what anyone would do. That was heroism at the highest level. And the government buried it to avoid controversy. He turned to the woman with the briefcase, which is why we are fixing that right now. The woman stepped forward. Captain Hayes, I am Rebecca Torres, Office of the Secretary of Defense. As of 0600 this morning, Operation Sandstorm Fury has been declassified. The full records, the full truth is now public. She opened the briefcase. The 5 members of Phantom Squadron who gave their lives have been posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Major Victoria Blackwood, Captain Blake Whitmore, Lieutenant Amanda Price, Lieutenant Rachel Voss, Captain Jennifer Stark. She pulled out a 6th medal. And you, Captain Hayes, are being awarded the Medal of Honor for actions above and beyond the call of duty on March 16, 2003, and for rescuing 9 Marines under impossible conditions on this date. Sarah stared at the medal, the highest military honor in the United States. The one she had been told she could never receive because acknowledging her actions meant acknowledging the lie. I do not deserve this, she whispered. Blake deserves this. Victoria deserves this. They died. I just survived. You survived, Reese Cunningham said, because you were too stubborn to die before bringing people home. That is exactly who deserves this medal. The ceremony happened right there on the tarmac with 200 Marines as witnesses. Rebecca Torres read the citation. Reese Cunningham placed the medal around Sarah's neck, and Colonel Thaddeus Cunningham stood at attention with tears running freely down his weathered face. When it was done, the Marines erupted again. But Sarah barely heard it. She was looking at the sky at the sun rising over the flight line, thinking about 5 women who would never see another dawn. As the crowd began to thin, Colonel Thaddeus Cunningham found himself standing alone near the edge of the tarmac. His arm ached in its sling. His ribs protested every breath. He was 68 years old and had just survived a helicopter crash in a sandstorm because he had been too stubborn to let a woman fly into hell alone. Worth it. Dad, Cunningham turned. Reese stood there, still in his dress uniform, the stars on his shoulders catching the late afternoon sun. For a moment, neither spoke. Just a father and son separated by rank and time and all the things that had gone unsaid for 21 years. You knew, Reese said quietly, when you called me 3 nights ago and told me about Phantom 7, about Captain Whitmore, about what really happened. You already knew you were going to fly that rescue mission. I suspected it might come to that. You are 68 years old. You had no business. I had every business. Cunningham's voice was firm. She saved you. Blake Whitmore died so you could live. I spent 21 years not knowing how to repay that debt. When the chance came, I took it. Reese's jaw worked. Then he pulled his father into a careful embrace, mindful of the injuries. You could have died. So could you back in Iraq. So could Sarah every time she chose to stay when she should have run. Death comes for us all eventually, son. The only question is what we do before it arrives. Cunningham pulled back, met his son's eyes. I wanted to do something that mattered. Something that honored the people who gave everything so my boy could come home. Reese saluted his father. Not the casual salute of a general to a colonel, but the deep formal salute of a son honoring the man who taught him what courage looked like. You did, Dad. You gave her back her honor. You let me thank the person who saved my life. You showed me that doing the right thing sometimes means breaking the rules. His voice cracked slightly. You showed me what it means to be a Marine. Cunningham returned the salute. I learned from the best. I learned from watching you. They stood together, father and son, as the sun set over the flight line, and the past finally made peace with the present. Captain Donovan Carter waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before approaching Sarah. The arrogance that had defined him 3 days ago had been stripped away, leaving something rawer and more honest. Major Hayes, he extended his hand. I was wrong about you, about everything. When I challenged you to that dogfight, it was not about your skill. It was about my fear that I was not as good as I thought I was. He paused. You did not just beat me. You showed me what excellence actually looks like. Sarah shook his hand. And now I want to learn from the best. Request permission to join Phantom Squadron, ma'am. I know I do not deserve it after how I acted, but permission granted, Captain. Report at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your determination and leave your ego at home. Carter's face broke into a genuine smile. Already left it somewhere in that simulator, ma'am. Mrs. Whitmore approached with Garrett. She was 70 now, silver-haired, but her eyes carried the same strength that had allowed her to raise a son alone after her husband died a hero. She handed Sarah a worn envelope. Blake wrote this the night before his last mission. Made me promise not to open it unless something happened. I opened it 3 months after the government told me he was gone. Her hands trembled slightly. He wanted you to have this. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Blake's handwriting familiar after all these years, Sarah. If you are reading this, I did not make it home. Do not blame yourself. Whatever choice we made it together. You are the best pilot I have ever known, and more importantly, the best friend. Tell Garrett about me. Tell him I was proud to fly with you. And Sarah, keep flying for both of us. Your wingman, Blake. Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming freely now. Mrs. Whitmore embraced her two women bound by the man they had both loved. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore whispered, for bringing him home. All of him, even the parts I never got to see. Thank you, Sarah replied, her voice breaking, for sharing him with me, for understanding. That evening, as the sun set over Miramar, a small ceremony took place at the memorial wall where the names of fallen Marines were inscribed. A new section had been added. 5 names, 5 women who had died as shadows and were now acknowledged as heroes. Sarah stood before the wall with Garrett Whitmore on one side and Mrs. Whitmore on the other. Avery Brennan stood at attention behind them. Colonel Cunningham and his son Reese flanked the group. Captain Carter waited at the back, no longer the arrogant pilot, but a student ready to learn. Sarah touched Blake's name, traced the letters with her fingertips. I brought your son home, Blake, she said, her voice steady now. Just like you brought those Marines home. Your sacrifice was not wasted. Garrett became everything you hoped he would be. Strong, brave, a Marine who puts others first. She paused. I hope you are proud. I hope you are finally at peace. Mrs. Whitmore placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Garrett stood on the other side, the three of them connected by a man who had died, ensuring they could stand here together. The wind shifted. Somewhere on the flight line, a jet engine roared to life. The sound of readiness, the sound of continuation. Sarah stepped back, saluted the wall with the precision of someone who had earned every degree of that gesture. Around her, the others saluted too. 7 people honoring 5 names, understanding that sacrifice creates ripples that extend far beyond the moment of death. 3 days later, the official reformation ceremony for Phantom Squadron took place on the parade ground. 6 FA-18 Super Hornets sat in formation, newly painted, each bearing a number. Phantom 1 through Phantom 6 honoring the original squadron, and beside them a 7th aircraft marked Phantom 8 waiting for Sergeant Avery Brennan. Sarah stood before her new squadron, 7 pilots, hand-selected. Avery Brennan, Donovan Carter, humbled and hungry to learn. 5 others, each with their own story, each chosen for skill and character in equal measure. The original Phantom Squadron was built on a simple principle, Sarah told them. No one gets left behind. 5 of my teammates died living that principle. I survived because they refused to abandon it even when dying was easier. She looked each pilot in the eye. This squadron is not about being the best. It is about being the person who flies back into the fire when everyone else is running away. It is about making the hard choice and living with the consequences. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, they answered in unison. Sergeant Brennan front and center. Avery marched forward, spine straight, eyes bright with barely contained emotion. Sergeant Avery Brennan, Sarah said formally, you flew into a sandstorm to save 9 Marines. You held that hoist line when the aircraft was seconds from crashing. You proved you have what it takes to be a Phantom. Sarah held out a flight suit, Phantom 8 patches already affixed. Welcome to the squadron. Avery took the flight suit with shaking hands. Ma'am, I will not let you down. I know you will not. That is why you are here. The assembled Marines erupted in applause. Avery stood there, tears streaming down her face, holding the uniform that represented everything she had worked for. Then welcome to the Phantoms, Sarah said to all of them. Let us make our predecessors proud. The ceremony ended. The pilots dispersed to their aircraft for the first training flight. Sarah walked to Phantom 7, ran her hand along the fuselage one more time. Colonel Cunningham approached, his arm now out of the sling. Major Hayes, one more thing. He handed her a folder. Promotion orders. Effective immediately, you are now Major Sarah Hayes, Commanding Officer of Phantom Squadron. Sarah opened the folder, saw the signature of the Secretary of Defense, saw the date 21 years to the day after Operation Sandstorm Fury. Timing seems deliberate, sir. History should be honored on the day it was made. Cunningham's eyes gleamed. Major Hayes, you are dismissed to lead your first training flight. Show them what Phantoms can do. Sarah saluted. Cunningham returned it. Then the old colonel watched as the new major climbed into her aircraft, started the engines, and led 7 fighters down the runway. They lifted off in formation, 7 jets rising into the golden afternoon sky. Sarah's voice came over the squadron frequency, calm and certain. Phantom Squadron, this is Phantom 7. Welcome to the sky. Welcome to the legacy. Blake, Victoria. Amanda, Rachel, Jennifer, this one is for you. We are still flying. The 7 aircraft banked in perfect formation caught the sun and climbed toward the endless blue. On the ground, Garrett Whitmore stood with his mother watching them go. Mrs. Whitmore squeezed her son's hand. Your father would have loved this, she said. He is here, Garrett replied, in every one of those jets, in every pilot who refuses to quit. He never really left. Major General Reese Cunningham stood with his father, both men shading their eyes against the sun as they watched the phantoms disappear into the distance. You gave her back her wings, Dad. She never lost them, son. She just needed permission to use them again. The jets became specks against the sky. Then they vanished entirely, leaving only contrails that spelled out a message for anyone who cared to read. Some debts can never be fully repaid. Some sacrifices echo across decades. Some heroes are buried for a generation before the world is ready to acknowledge them. But the sky remembers. The sky always remembers. And in the sky, Major Sarah Hayes led her squadron through a series of maneuvers that would have made her original team proud. The Phantom Spiral, the Rolling Thunder, the Ghost Run, each one a tribute, each one a promise. No one gets left behind, not anymore, not ever again. Far below, the sun touched the horizon. The flight line glowed gold, and in the fading light, 7 aircraft returned to base, touching down one by one with the precision of people who had learned from the best. Sarah climbed out of Phantom 7 and stood on the tarmac surrounded by her new squadron. Avery grinned like a child on Christmas. Carter shook his head in amazement. The others looked at her with the respect reserved for someone who had earned every ounce of it. Tomorrow, Sarah told them, we start real training. Tomorrow I teach you what it means to be a phantom. Tonight, get some rest. You are going to need it. They dispersed, chattering with excitement and exhaustion. Sarah stood alone for a moment, looking at the 7 jets lined up perfect and ready. Colonel Cunningham approached one last time. Major Hayes, permission to speak freely. Always, sir. Blake would be proud. All of them would be. Sarah looked at the sky where stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue. I hope so, Colonel. I really do. I know so. Cunningham put a hand on her shoulder, brief but firm. Welcome home, Major. Welcome home. He walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the gathering darkness, the metal around her neck catching the last rays of sunlight. She thought about Blake, about Victoria, about Jennifer and Amanda and Rachel, about 5 women who had given everything and received only silence in return. Until now. Still flying, she whispered to the stars. Still flying with you. Always. The night settled over Miramar. The last light faded, and somewhere in the darkness, the sound of a new generation preparing for tomorrow's missions promised that the story was not over. It was just beginning.